For 7 years, Luna Aurelia Voss stood beside Alpha King Kaler Draven. Most people assumed her life was easy. After all, she lived in the royal palace, wore elegant gowns, attended grand celebrations, shared a throne with one of the most powerful rulers in the kingdom. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. The reality was less glamorous. Kings received glory, queens handled consequences. Whenever Kaler negotiated a treaty, Aurelia spent weeks maintaining relationships afterward. Whenever he won political victories, she soothed the nobles who lost. Whenever conflict threatened the kingdom, she quietly resolved problems before they reached his desk. The kingdom praised Kaler's leadership. Aurelia made sure that leadership survived, and she never complained. Not because she lacked opinions, because she loved him. Completely. The kind of love that makes sacrifice feel reasonable. The kind that convinces you partnership matters more than recognition. For years, that belief sustained her. The palace staff adored her. Foreign diplomats trusted her. Even Kaler relied on her more than he realized. If an important guest needed welcoming, Aurelia handled it. If two noble families threatened to start another feud, Aurelia intervened. If the king forgot an anniversary, a birthday, or a personal obligation, Aurelia quietly fixed the situation before anyone noticed. She became the solution to countless problems. The danger of becoming indispensable is that people eventually stop noticing your effort. They only notice the results. Kaler wasn't cruel. That was the frustrating part. He wasn't dismissive. He wasn't unfaithful. He genuinely appreciated Aurelia. At least he believed he did. But appreciation and attention are not the same thing. Over the years, responsibility consumed more of his time. Council meetings grew longer. Military concerns multiplied. Trade negotiations expanded. Every problem seemed urgent. Every crisis demanded immediate attention. Meanwhile, Aurelia patiently waited for tomorrow. Tomorrow they would spend time together. Tomorrow they would take a walk through the palace gardens. Tomorrow they would have dinner without interruptions. Tomorrow always sounded promising, until tomorrow became next week. Then next month. Then next year. The distance appeared gradually, so gradually that neither of them noticed at first. Aurelia told herself it was temporary. Kaler told himself she understood. Both assumptions proved dangerous. One evening, after another delayed dinner, Aurelia stood alone on a palace balcony overlooking the city. The lights below flickered beneath the night sky, beautiful, peaceful, distant. She wondered when she had last felt truly close to her husband. The answer made her uncomfortable, because she couldn't remember. The thought lingered long after midnight, and unfortunately for Aurelia, life was about to give that loneliness a name from Kaler's past. A woman neither of them expected to see again. Her name was Celine Ashbourne, and 5 years before Kaler became king, she had been the woman everyone expected him to marry. Back then, Kaler was still a prince, young, ambitious, certain of his future. Celine stood beside him through most of it. They attended royal functions together, trained together, planned a life together, at least until she disappeared. No warning, no explanation, no farewell. One day she was there, the next she was gone. The kingdom spent months speculating about what happened. Some blamed her family, others blamed politics. A few invented scandals. Eventually, the rumors faded. Time moved forward, Kaler moved forward. Then he met Aurelia. Years later, they married, built a kingdom together, created a life that seemed stable, secure, permanent, which was why Celine's return shocked everyone, including Aurelia. The news arrived through palace gossip first. A merchant spotted her near the eastern border. A noble confirmed the sighting. Within days, the rumors became fact. Celine Ashbourne had returned. At first, Aurelia wasn't worried. Why would she be? The past was the past. Kaler hadn't spoken about Celine in years. Their relationship ended long before Aurelia entered his life. There was no reason to feel threatened by a ghost. For a while, nothing happened. Then small changes appeared. the dangerous kind. Not dramatic enough to confront, not insignificant enough to ignore. Celine began attending royal events. Nothing unusual. Many nobles attended. Then Kaler started lingering after those events ended. Conversations stretched longer. Council discussions became strangely detailed whenever Celine offered opinions. Old stories resurfaced. Memories emerged. People laughed about events from years ago. Events that happened before Aurelia existed in Kaler's life. The exclusion wasn't intentional. That almost made it worse. One evening, during a diplomatic reception, Aurelia watched from across the room as Kaler and Celine spoke near a balcony. Nothing inappropriate happened. They weren't touching, they weren't flirting, they were simply talking, yet something felt wrong. Kaler looked different, lighter, like a man briefly revisiting another version of himself, a version that existed before responsibilities, before crowns, before obligations. The sight unsettled her. Later that night, she finally mentioned it, carefully, gently. I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Celine. Kaler barely looked up from the documents he was reviewing. Have I? The answer immediately frustrated her, not because it was dishonest, because it sounded dismissive. Aurelia remained calm. A little. Kaler smiled faintly, then returned his attention to the papers. You're imagining things. The response ended the conversation, at least for him, not for her. 'Cause once doubt enters a relationship, it rarely leaves quietly. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Celine attended more gatherings. Kaler spent more time remembering the past. And Aurelia found herself feeling increasingly alone in a marriage she once considered unshakable. Still, she told herself not to overreact. Still, she trusted him. Still, she believed she might be wrong. Until one night, while crossing the Western Gallery, she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. And a single word changed everything. Aurelia wasn't searching for answers. That was the cruel part. She wasn't spying, wasn't following Kaler, wasn't trying to catch him doing something wrong. She simply happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. Or perhaps the right place at the worst possible time. The Western Gallery was nearly empty that evening. Most of the palace staff had retired for the night. Council meetings had ended hours earlier. The corridors sat quiet beneath the glow of lantern light. Aurelia carried several diplomatic reports she intended to review before bed. Nothing unusual, nothing important, until voices drifted through an open chamber door. One of them belonged to Kaler. She recognized it immediately. The other belonged to General Rowan Hale, one of the king's oldest advisors. Aurelia slowed her steps, not intentionally. The conversation simply caught her attention. Inside the chamber, the men sounded relaxed. The serious business of governance had apparently ended. Now they were speaking as friends, laughing, reminiscing, discussing the past. Aurelia would have continued walking. Then she heard a familiar name, Celine. Her grip tightened slightly on the reports. Inside the room, the general chuckled. I'll admit it, Your Majesty. More laughter followed. Seeing Celine back in the kingdom feels strange. Kaler's voice answered calmly. A little. The general seemed amused. I remember when everyone thought you'd marry her. Silence. A short pause. Nothing unusual. Then the general added, if she had never left, things would have been very different. The words hung in the air. Aurelia stopped walking, not because the statement bothered her, because she suddenly needed to hear the answer. Inside the chamber, silence stretched longer than expected. 1 second, 2, 3. Long enough for hope to appear, long enough for her to imagine Kaler laughing off the comment, long enough to believe everything was fine. Then Kaler answered yes, one word, nothing more, no explanation, no qualification, no correction, just agreement. Aurelia felt the world shift beneath her feet, not dramatically, not violently, quietly. Like ice cracking beneath someone who hasn't realized they're standing on something fragile. The answer shouldn't have mattered, not logically. Kaler wasn't confessing love for Celine. He wasn't planning to leave his marriage. He wasn't even saying he regretted marrying Aurelia. Yet somehow the single word hurt more than any of those things, because it revealed something deeper, something more dangerous. Part of him still wondered, still looked backward, still imagined a different version of his life. And suddenly Aurelia understood why the past few months felt so uncomfortable. She wasn't competing with another woman. She was competing with memory, with possibility, with a future that never happened. And nobody wins against an imagined life. The realization settled heavily in her chest. For several moments, she remained outside the chamber, listening to the conversation continue. Neither man realized she was there. Neither man understood what had just happened. Eventually, Aurelia turned away. The reports in her hands suddenly felt meaningless. By the time she reached her rooms, she knew something with absolute certainty. The marriage wasn't broken because Kaler loved someone else. It was broken because part of him still wondered whether he should have. And that night, for the first time in 7 years, Aurelia stopped waiting. Aurelia did not cry, that surprised her. After 7 years of marriage, she expected heartbreak to look dramatic. Tears, anger, some overwhelming emotion powerful enough to leave her unable to think clearly. Instead, she felt calm, not because she wasn't hurting, because the pain had already arrived. The conversation in the Western Gallery hadn't created the wound, it had revealed it. And once a truth becomes impossible to ignore, pretending requires more energy than acceptance. The palace slept peacefully around her. Guards patrolled the corridors. Servants retired to their quarters. Candles burned low in distant hallways. Everything appeared normal, which somehow made her decision feel even heavier. Slowly, Aurelia opened her wardrobe. She removed a single travel case, not a large one. There wasn't much she wanted to take. A few dresses, personal documents, several books she loved. Nothing connected to the throne. Nothing connected to the palace. Nothing connected to Kaler. As she packed, memories surfaced. 7 years of them. A celebration after his coronation. Long evenings spent planning diplomatic strategies together. Countless victories. Countless sacrifices. Moments that once felt permanent. The memories still mattered. That was what made leaving so difficult. She still loved him. That hadn't changed. The problem was that love alone could not survive uncertainty forever. Eventually, Aurelia crossed the room toward her writing desk. The blank sheet of paper waiting there seemed strangely intimidating. She could explain everything, describe every disappointment, every lonely evening. Every moment she felt herself becoming less important than a memory. Instead, she picked up a pen and wrote a single sentence. I deserve to be loved by someone who isn't wondering about another future. Nothing more, no accusations, no demands, no dramatic farewell. The sentence said everything that mattered. After folding the letter, she placed it where Kaler would find it, then removed her wedding ring. For several seconds, she stared at the gold band resting in her palm, a symbol of promises, partnership. Forever. The irony hurt, because forever often ends long before people admit it. Carefully, she placed the ring beside the letter, then looked around the room one final time. The chambers she once considered home, the life she spent 7 years building, the future she thought was certain. All of it remained behind. Just before dawn, Aurelia slipped through a quiet service entrance near the Eastern Gardens. No one stopped her, no one questioned her. The palace staff trusted her completely, which made leaving surprisingly easy. The cool morning air greeted her as she stepped beyond the palace walls. For a moment she paused, not because she was reconsidering, because she was saying goodbye. Then she turned away and kept walking. Hours later, Kaler entered their chambers expecting an ordinary morning. Instead, he found an empty room, an untouched bed, a folded letter, and a wedding ring resting beside it. The sight immediately drained the color from his face. For several seconds, he simply stared, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to understand. Then he opened the letter, and by the time he finished reading it, Aurelia was already gone. 5 years later, fate would bring them together again. But by then, neither of them would be the same people who stood inside that palace. 5 years changed many things. Kingdoms expanded. Alliances shifted. Old rivals became partners. New conflicts emerged. Time moved forward whether people were ready or not. For Aurelia Voss, those 5 years became something she never expected. Peace. Not immediately. The first year had been difficult. The second wasn't much easier. Leaving a life behind never feels as clean as people imagine. Memories linger, questions linger, love lingers longest of all. Yet slowly, something changed. Aurelia stopped measuring her future against her past. She built a new life, one decision at a time, one day at a time. And eventually, she became someone entirely different from the woman who walked away before sunrise. The coastal city of Silver Bay played a large part in that transformation. Located along the kingdom's western trade routes, the city thrived through commerce, diplomacy, and cooperation. People cared less about titles there, less about politics, less about who someone used to be. They cared about what a person contributed. Aurelia appreciated that. Over time, she earned respect, then trust, then influence. By the 5th year, she had become one of the most respected organizers in the region. Merchants sought her advice. Community leaders requested her help. Trade officials consulted her before major negotiations. The life she built belonged entirely to her, and for the first time in years, that felt enough. The Harvest Summit brought all of Silver Bay to life. Representatives from dozens of territories arrived. Market squares overflowed with visitors. Ships crowded the harbor. Banners filled the streets. The annual event attracted nobles, merchants, pack leaders, and royal officials from across the continent, including one Alpha King, though Aurelia didn't know that yet. That morning, she moved through the crowded marketplace carrying a list of summit responsibilities. Vendors called to passing customers. Children darted between market stalls. Musicians performed near the fountain. The city buzzed with energy. Beside her walked a little boy, 5 years old, bright-eyed, curious about everything. Cassian Voss, her son. His dark hair refused to stay neat. His silver eyes seemed permanently filled with questions, and his endless curiosity kept Aurelia smiling even during difficult days. At the moment, he was fascinated by a wooden wolf toy displayed by a craftsman. "Mom, look!" Aurelia laughed softly. "I see it." The excitement on his face made the purchase inevitable. A few minutes later, Cassian proudly carried his new treasure through the market. The sight warmed her heart. 5 years ago, she left the palace believing she had lost her future. Now she understood something important. Sometimes losing one future creates space for another, one far better than anything you imagined. Then the crowd suddenly shifted. Conversations quieted. People stepped aside. Royal guards entered the square. Aurelia's stomach tightened instantly, because there was only one reason an escort like that would appear. Slowly, she looked up, and across the crowded marketplace, she saw Kalar Draven for the first time in 5 years. For a moment, the entire marketplace disappeared. The merchants, the music, the crowd, everything faded into the background. Only Kalar remained. 5 years, 5 long years, and somehow Aurelia recognized him instantly. He looked older, not dramatically, just enough, the kind of change responsibility creates. His shoulders carried more weight now. His expressions seemed more guarded, more serious. Yet he was still unmistakably Kalar, the man she once believed she would spend the rest of her life beside. Across the square, Kalar looked up. Their eyes met, and time collapsed. The shock on his face appeared immediately, raw, unfiltered, as though he had spent years imagining this moment and still wasn't prepared for it. Neither moved, neither spoke. The distance between them suddenly felt much smaller than 5 years. Then a cheerful voice shattered the silence. "Mom!" Aurelia blinked. Reality returned. Cassian came running through the crowd clutching his wooden wolf toy. His smile was wide, his excitement completely unaffected by the emotional storm unfolding around him. Instinctively, Aurelia knelt. Slow down. The little boy laughed and threw his arms around her neck. She hugged him tightly. For a moment, everything else ceased to matter. The marketplace, the memories, the king. Nothing felt more important than the child in her arms. When she finally stood again, Kaler had reached them. Several guards remained respectfully behind him. His gaze moved briefly toward Cassian. Only briefly, then returned to Aurelia. And that was the problem. He didn't really look. Not at the boy, not carefully. His attention remained trapped in the past, focused entirely on the woman standing before him, Aurelia. Hearing her name in his voice felt strange, familiar, distant, painful. She offered a polite smile, the kind reserved for old acquaintances, not former husbands. Your Majesty. The formality landed harder than she intended. Kaler noticed. His expression tightened slightly. For several seconds, neither knew what to say. 5 years creates a lot of silence. Eventually, he asked the safest question available. How have you been? Well, the answer was honest. That seemed to surprise him. You look happy. Aurelia glanced down at Cassian. The little boy was examining his wooden wolf with complete concentration. A smile touched her lips. I am. The response created another silence. Longer this time. More complicated. Cassian finally looked up. His curious silver eyes settled on Kaler. The Alpha Kings stared back politely. Still not seeing, still not noticing. Then came the question children always ask. Mom, who's he? Aurelia's heart nearly stopped. For a split second, panic flashed through her. Not because of the question. Because of the answer she couldn't give. Not here. Not now. Not like this. Kaler waited patiently, completely unaware of the significance. Completely unaware that the child standing beside her carried his eyes, his posture, even the faint scar above one eyebrow that existed throughout the Draven bloodline. The resemblance seemed obvious. Yet Kaler never truly looked. A few minutes later, the conversation ended. Polite words, polite farewells, nothing more. As Aurelia walked away with Cassian's hand in hers, she allowed herself a small breath of relief. The moment had passed. The secret remained safe. Unfortunately, fate had one final surprise waiting, and by nightfall, a single document would change everything. Kaler couldn't focus for the rest of the afternoon. The Harvest Summit continued around him. Trade negotiations advanced. Regional leaders presented reports. Merchants discussed contracts worth fortunes. Normally, he would have been fully engaged. Today, every conversation felt distant, because Aurelia was here. After 5 years of wondering where she had gone. 5 years of remembering an empty room, a wedding ring, and a single sentence written on a folded letter. Now she was suddenly walking through the same city, smiling, thriving, looking happier than he remembered. The realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. By evening, Laura sat inside a temporary council chamber reviewing summit documents. At least he pretended to review them. His eyes moved across the pages. His mind remained elsewhere. Eventually, one of his advisors entered carrying several administrative files. Your Majesty, these require your signature. Kaler accepted them without interest. Population reports, trade records, regional registrations, routine paperwork. The sort of documents no ruler actually enjoys reading. He flipped through them mechanically, one page, then another, then another. Nothing held his attention, until he reached a family registry from Silver Bay. The document listed residents involved in summit operations, names, addresses, occupations, completely ordinary. Kaler nearly turned the page, then one name stopped him, Aurelia Voss. His hand froze. The room suddenly felt smaller. Slowly he lowered his eyes to the next line. Below her name appeared another entry, Cassian Voss, age 5. The words blurred briefly. Kaler read them again, then again, Cassian Voss, age 5. Silence settled across the chamber, a heavy, suffocating silence. His pulse quickened. A strange feeling crept through his chest. Not understanding, not yet. Something worse. Recognition. The marketplace flashed through his mind. The little boy, dark hair, silver eyes, the child calling Aurelia Mom. His fingers tightened around the document. 5 years old. Exactly 5 years old. The timing felt impossible. Then memories began assembling themselves. One after another, relentless. The shape of the boy's face, the familiar eyes, the way he stood, the tiny scar above his eyebrow. A scar Kaelor himself carried. A scar his father carried before him. A scar present in generations of Dravens. The paper slipped slightly in his hand. No. The word escaped before he realized he spoke aloud. The advisor looked confused. Your Majesty? Kaelor didn't answer, because suddenly every piece fit together. The marketplace, the awkward tension. Aurelia's reaction when the boy asked who he was. The panic that flashed across her face. The truth rushed toward him all at once. Fast, brutal, unavoidable. His chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood. The advisor jumped, the document scattered across the desk. Kaelor barely noticed, because one thought now consumed everything else. If he was right, if the impossible was true, then he hadn't merely lost Aurelia 5 years ago. He had lost something else, someone else. 5 birthdays, 5 winters, 5 years, gone. Without another word, Kaelor grabbed the registry and headed for the door. There was only one person who could confirm the truth, and he intended to find her immediately. Kaelor found Aurelia the following morning. The harbor was quiet at sunrise. Fishing boats drifted across the water. Seagulls circled overhead. The city had not fully awakened yet, which was exactly why Aurelia liked coming there. The peacefulness reminded her that not every day needed to begin with chaos. Unfortunately, today would be different. She saw Kaelor before he reached her. The determined expression on his face told her everything. He knew, or at least suspected. For a brief moment she considered leaving. Not out of fear, out of exhaustion. Some conversations take years to arrive, and when they finally do, they rarely bring peace with them. Nearby, Cassian stood at the edge of the dock, tossing crumbs to a flock of seabirds. His laughter carried across the water, bright, carefree, innocent. Kaelor followed the sound, and for the first time he truly looked. Not a passing glance, not polite acknowledgement, a real look, the kind he should have given yesterday, the kind he should have given immediately. His gaze settled on the boy, the silver eyes, the dark hair, the familiar posture, the tiny scar above one eyebrow. Every detail suddenly seemed impossible to miss. The resemblance wasn't subtle anymore. It was undeniable. Kaelor felt something twist painfully inside his chest. 5 years, how had he not seen it? Because he wasn't looking. The answer arrived instantly. Yesterday he had been focused on Aurelia, focused on his regret, focused on the past. Now he saw what stood directly in front of him, and suddenly the truth became unavoidable. Slowly, Kaelor turned toward her. His voice sounded quieter than usual, almost uncertain. He's mine, not a question. A realization. Aurelia remained silent. The harbor breeze moved gently through her hair. For several moments neither spoke. Then she nodded. Once, nothing more. The confirmation hit harder than he expected, because part of him had hoped he was wrong, not because he didn't want the child, because he couldn't bear what the truth meant. 5 years, 5 entire years, missed, gone forever. Kaelor looked back toward Cassian, his son. The words felt unreal. His son, a little boy who had learned to walk without him, learned to talk without him, celebrated birthdays without him, grown up without ever knowing who he was. The weight of it nearly stole his breath. Finally, Kaelor faced Aurelia again. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it. Not accusatory, not angry, broken. Aurelia studied him carefully. For the first time since his arrival, genuine sadness entered her expression. Not for herself, for him, because she knew exactly what he was feeling. And she knew the next answer would hurt even more. The harbor fell silent except for the distant cries of seabirds. Cassian continued laughing nearby, completely unaware that his entire world had just changed. Aurelia folded her arms gently, then met Kaler's gaze, and prepared to tell him the reason she kept the truth hidden for 5 long years. The harbor remained quiet. Only the sound of waves touching the docks interrupted the silence between them. A few feet away, Cassian continued feeding seabirds, laughing whenever they swooped low enough to steal crumbs from his hand. He had no idea that his future had just shifted. No idea that the stranger standing nearby was his father. No idea that two people were carrying the weight of 5 lost years. Kaler couldn't take his eyes off him. Every movement felt precious now. Every smile, every laugh, every second. Because he understood something devastating. He was seeing these moments for the first time, and they would never happen again. Eventually, he forced himself to look at Aurelia. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question sounded softer than before, less demanding, more wounded. Aurelia watched Cassian for a moment before answering. When she finally spoke, her voice remained calm. "I left because I realized I wasn't competing with another woman." Kaelor lowered his gaze. The old wound still existed between them. "I know. No." She shook her head gently. "You know now, the distinction mattered a great deal." Aurelia continued. "I wasn't afraid of Celine. The truth surprised him, because part of him always assumed that was the problem." She offered a sad smile. "I was afraid of uncertainty." The harbor seemed to grow quieter. "Every day I wondered whether part of you wished your life had turned out differently." Kaler closed his eyes briefly. The memory of that conversation with his general returned immediately. The careless answer, the thoughtless agreement. One word, one terrible word. Aurelia folded her hands. "I could survive being unloved." The statement hit him hard. "But I couldn't raise a child wondering if he was." Kaler froze. The meaning landed instantly, painfully. Aurelia looked toward Cassian. "My son was never going to grow up feeling like someone's second choice." Silence, complete silence, because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to defend, nothing to explain away. She hadn't hidden Cassian out of revenge, or anger, or punishment. She had protected him from uncertainty, the exact thing that destroyed their marriage. Kaler stared at his son. His son. The words still felt impossible. 5 birthdays, 5 winters, 5 years of first steps, first words, and first dreams. Gone, not stolen, not taken from him. Missed, because actions have consequences. And some consequences arrive years later. Finally, Kaler spoke. "Does he know?" Aurelia shook her head. No, another silence followed. Then Kaler nodded slowly, not because he accepted it, because he understood. The realization hurt more than anger would have. Across the harbor, Cassian suddenly turned and waved enthusiastically. "Mom, look!" A bird had landed beside him. Proud excitement filled his face. Aurelia smiled instantly, the kind of smile only a parent understands. Kaler watched the exchange quietly, and for the first time in his life, he understood the true cost of taking someone for granted. It wasn't losing them, it wasn't regret, it wasn't loneliness. It was realizing they built an entire life after they left, a life that continued without you, a life filled with moments you'll never get back. As Cassian laughed near the water, Kaler felt the weight of 5 lost years settle heavily on his shoulders, and he knew some things time could heal. But time never returns what it has already taken.